Big times in the world of football right around the country, big time too in the sport of racing. And it's great to see as we welcome our guest, Keith Hillier, here in Melbourne. Lee Friedman, also here in Melbourne.
Morning, Sandy.
Gentlemen, welcome to you. And I've got to use a quote from Lee. He said, "Who have you got up in Sydney?" And I said, "Mr. President." He said, "Oh, Mahogany Max." So, Max, welcome.
Good morning, gentlemen. I think Lee's won the prize. Those Daxar wait for age performance.
I'm glad you noticed them, Max. It is spring, you know.
You're right, Sandy. What a week it's been in racing, both on the track and off the track. During the week, Mahogany named the Horse of the Year. Melbourne Cup weights released, and yesterday, Mahogany did it where he had to on the track too, but narrowly. Max, were you impressed?
No.
Oh, Lee?
But, Mahogany can put in an average one, but at this point, Keith, I would like to issue a Sydney challenge to Lee Friedman and Mahogany. Lee, bring Mahogany up for the George Main Stakes. Take on March Hare over 1,600 metres at Randwick. We'll look after the X's to bring the horse up here. You'll have to find your own, of course. If the prize money doesn't suit, I think we could, you know, the AJC were telling me yesterday that perhaps they would be prepared to put in about another 20 large, might even get to 50.
Well, what do you say to that?
Well, it's an interesting proposal. I'll give it some serious thought, Max. Yes.
And what do you say to his first answer, that he wasn't impressed by Mahogany?
Well, Freud said it before, there's a fine line between love and hate, and I think Max has found that with Mahogany.
He has won 9 out of his past 11, but in a way, Max does have a point, Lee, because yesterday Mahogany seemed to switch off in the last 150 metres.
Yeah, I think, you know, probably with horses, as with probably other athletes too, we can spend too much time dissecting performances. I just think probably yesterday's second up, everyone knows he's never been as good second up, and yet he finds, as he gets further into his preparation, he keeps finding form. So, you know, I was happy with the performance. I was unhappy that he probably switched off when he should have won easier than that.
Well, we'll have more on Mahogany in just a moment. Let's go to our first race though. Yesterday, Melbourne and Sydney featuring, and first up was the Ascot Vale Stakes.
Yes, during the week, St Covert was named the 2-year-old of last season against his rival Dan Zero, trained by Lee Friedman. Yesterday in the Ascot Vale, St Covert blotted his copybook, and you'll see Racer's Edge in the predominantly lime green colours get that split and go on and win. Bulldog Yates, well, he's from Brisbane. He came down here for the Trip Lee. Doesn't seem to measure up to others. Do you think that you've now got the best sprinting 3-year-old in Dan Zero ahead of St Covert, who flopped yesterday?
Yes, I do. I was here the day after he ran first up in the Mitchell Mackenzie, and I said that day that I was a little bit dubious about the performance there. And I think maybe with the weight differential in the Ascot Vale and the indifferent performance first up, the horse probably isn't quite at his best.
You'd have a better one in Sydney naturally, Max?
No, Dan Zero will do me.
Will he? OK, well, let's have a look at Mahogany now. And not only will we see Mahogany, but look for those colours, the blue and white striped cap. Now, these are carried by an import called Wan. It's owned by Sheikh Hamdan Maktoum, who had place getters in this race at Craigley Stakes in past years, Atalac and Elmerad. Atalac went on to win the Melbourne Cup. Elmerad the Cox Plate. And I think this horse, Wan, who comes from 11th, should be the reigning Melbourne Cup favourite. What do you think of his run, import, Lee?
I thought it was a good run. I think there'll be improvement in him. I think there'll be a lot of improvement in our horse too, so I think it's maybe a bit early to be calling him a Melbourne Cup favourite just yet.
Right. Good horses win by narrow margins?
I think so. You know, it was quite evident with Better Loosen Up when he was racing, and I'm sure Leilani and a lot of the great horses of the past didn't win by 3 and 4 lengths every time they went round. And I think that probably is part of the expectation thing. You get a horse as good as him and people expect them to do the impossible every time they go around, and the impossible is rarely possible.
Talking about possibles and impossibles, did you think that Poetic King, Max, could possibly be beaten in the Bobby Lewis yesterday?
No, I thought Poetic King was a good thing, but then again, I thought Poetic King would be ridden quietly back in the field. I didn't think he'd be up there doing the bullocking for speed under 57. The section showed that Poetic King, under these circumstances, couldn't possibly win. I thought it was a very courageous run by Poetic King, and I'll be backing him next start, as long as he's ridden off the pace, because you can't participate in these type of races and be up there, particularly with weight, and run on. Certainly Hariba and Sequalo showed that last start when they had a nice battle for the lead and wilted. But there he is, like Poetic King. He's under a big weight. He's sticking to his task. He's a very promising racehorse, and given a bit of a chance in as much as allowed to settle down next start, I think he'll do better.
Well, there was Hariba. He holds a Mini Valley record, 1,200 metres, 1:08.2 yesterday. 5s out to 10 to 1. Amazing. Well, Max has given you all the advice in the world. Are you going to heed any of that?
I do agree with him. I will say in the horse's defence that Damien has said for the last couple of starts he'd be more confident if we took the blinkers off the horse, and he felt that he over-raced with the blinkers on yesterday. And he did top up a bit after the run, so he's had a hard run, but I'm sure he'll bounce back.
I'd like you to watch closely for the next one, Lee, because we're going to Randwick yesterday, and this is March Hare. This is the horse that Max has thrown out the challenge to you this morning for Mahogany to beat. He was never on the track, and it was a very impressive win.
While I've thrown out the challenge, I didn't say which horse I'd necessarily be on. I just want you to get that factor for a start. But that's March Hare on the outside. Note how Jimmy Cassidy just lets him come over the rise and lets him stray wide. He's looking for better ground, but also note the fast finish of Fraternity down the outside. Now, this is a dead set live Cups hope. As you see now, March Hare really getting his mind on the job, a couple of clicks and takes off, but that's Fraternity down the outside, going to the line most encouragingly, and Fraternity is very, very much a Caulfield Cup hope and could even graduate to the Melbourne Cup.
Well, how would the challenge work out if it eventuated?
In what way?
What would the result be?
I'll just wait till it does eventuate. We get Mahogany up here and have a look at the prices. But I can assure Lee and Lloyd Williams this, you'll get on.
Well, that's good. Well, I'll throw a challenge back, Max. If they're prepared to pay a fairly hefty cash inducement for the trainer to bring the horse, then I'll give it due consideration.
That's not out of the question, but I didn't think money was your only point.
It's not, but it's one of the best.
The whole thing sounds like a Clayton's challenge to me, Max. Big Dreams got his just reward at Randwick yesterday in the tramway.
Yes, Big Dreams had a nice passage to this point. Had to do a bit of bullocking to get out. But I'd like you to note the run of Tenor in the pink colours, back off, probably in front of about 6 horses now, looking for a run through the centre of the field, not having any luck. Was back Tenor, but didn't have any luck, and he's another one that could figure in the big cups. A very promising racehorse, but once Big Dreams gets out, he does sprint well clear. There's a few finishing on behind him, a few running into dead ends, but I didn't think there was any more impressive run than that of Tenor in the pink colours, just surging through in about 5th or 6th place now, not getting a lot of room.
Yeah, some of the action yesterday. Let's turn our attention, gentlemen, to the Cups because the weights came out during the week, and it was interesting that I think the top 16 horses, as far as weights are concerned, are all either overseas, including New Zealand. Does that say something about our equine quality here in Australia?
Oh, I don't think so. I think it illustrates, Sandy, the intense interest in our Melbourne Cup now after the win of Vintage Crop last year. White Muzzle, he's one of the best horses in the world. He's the favourite for the Arc, but he probably won't come. He's an entire. Bob's Return is a very good horse. Doubtful. Vintage Crop 60 kilos last year.
Is Duma well decided yet?
Yep, he's coming, and why wouldn't he? 55 kilos last year. After that weight, he won the Orient Ledger, the Melbourne Cup. He won second in the Ascot Gold Cup and the Curragh Cup. He's won twice at a mile and a half in Ireland. What do you think of his weight, Vintage Crop?
I agree with you to a certain extent, Keith. I think he probably, I don't think he's really got his measure, although he is an 8-year-old. That's going to make it a little bit more difficult for him. But I think an interesting thing to come out of the Cup weights is that, as interesting as the weights were themselves, that the amount of whinging from England and Ireland and Hong Kong nearly deafened the press out here.
Mahogany, quick comment, 56 kilos?
Well, he gave him the same mark as Dulcify. I think that's a compliment to the horse. It's not a luxury, but it's not too bad either.
You might have noticed a smoke in the weights there, Cliveden Gale. He'll be the travelling companion for Vintage Crop. He's only got 49.5 kilos, so he's got to get into the race first. But he's had 14 starts, won 5, and he's had 9 runs at the Cup distance, 3,200 metres.
Actually, Bart too wouldn't have been too upset with Gossip's weight, would he?
No, he fancy Gossip's too.
Merely a question I'm throwing to the experts, gentlemen. That's all I can say at this stage. Lee, thank you very much for your time this morning. Have you got a hectic week ahead?
Off to Bendigo for Father's Day today, but I do have a hectic week. We're right into spring now. Sandy will be here next week, though.
And Max, you'll organise that challenge for us, will you?
Yes, and I certainly hope Lee Friedman will be a travelling companion for Mahogany when he comes up here.
All right, well, more on that next week. Gentlemen, thank you all very much. We'll take a break more shortly on Sportsworld.
Maybe this time for sure things are gonna work out different, not the way they did before. Maybe this time...
It's